Have you ever been really excited for a game, fired it up, started playing, and discovered that, actually, you're just not enjoying it? Maybe it's not an instant decision. It could be a slow, creeping realization that takes hold over time. Perhaps you fight it, and you continue playing despite this horrible feeling in your gut that you're not actually enjoying yourself. How many chances does a game get? When do we decide that enough is enough and we put it back on the shelf for the last time, delete it from our hard drive, or trade it in for something else? I've grappled with that decision 3 times this year in the form of a broadly maligned, underwhelming flop, a divisive piece of DLC, and what's being touted as one of the greatest RPGs of all time. Let's see how we can identify the pain points, why we might fight that sinking feeling, and how we can stop wasting our limited time on this earth by forcing ourselves to keep playing games that just aren't for us. We'll also encounter a plot twist that not even I could have seen coming when I sat down to write this script. Surprise events that threatened to invalidate and change my entire perspective, which made me choose between rewriting huge portions or potentially even cancelling this entire video. Stick around until the end to find out what that was. There's a reason I wanted to play each of these games, and by investigating their initial appeal, we can discover what expectations I had that the titles failed to deliver on. 7 years had passed between Rocksteady's Batman Arkham Knight and Warner Bros. Montreal's Gotham Knights. I had high hopes for this one. The Arkham Knight DLC that saw us play as Batgirl, Nightwing, Red Hood, and Robin, primarily in the aftermath of Batman's supposed death, were a good time. A whole game based around that premise, with co-op thrown in, from the developers of the sorely underappreciated Batman Arkham Origins? Sign me up! Sonic Frontiers had surprised me in a good way. It proved that Sonic could go open world. One of the few issues I had with the original release was the ending. By the time I reached the game's final island, the core gameplay loop of finding the Chaos Emeralds and defeating a Titan boss had gotten old. That final battle was then sadly underwhelming. This DLC promised to revamp that finale, add new playable characters, and give us a brand new ending. On paper, that sounds like it should address all of my concerns. Xenoblade Chronicles is the game that inspired this video. It's an anime-styled RPG set in a gorgeous world that everyone says is a must-play. I've heard nothing but praise for the entire franchise for years. Conceptually, a story-focused, single-player weeby RPG ticks all of my boxes, sounding like an ideal title for me, and a Definitive Edition remaster with added content seemed like the perfect starting point. It's important to ask ourselves why a game appeals to us and what our expectations are before we buy it. If we don't, it becomes harder to know when or why a title is, or in this case isn't, scratching the right itch. Now we know what drew me to each of these titles, and to an extent what I wanted from them, we can investigate which red flags started appearing, why I didn't get along with these outings, and when I finally started to realise and accept that they just weren't doing it for me. Gotham Knights, put simply, isn't Arkham. Fair enough, it was never advertised as Arkham, it was always going to be its own thing in its own universe. Even so, I had this nagging feeling that the game would be better off if it had been Arkham. Map traversal, gliding freely as Batman, has been replaced with some sluggish ziplining and some aerial abilities that not only have to be unlocked, but which also feel slow, clunky, and heavy. Oh, but the Batmobile from Knight has been replaced with a motorcycle that somehow feels more sluggish than the literal tank did. Just exploring Gotham or getting from point A to point B is a chore. Combat is no longer the engaging rhythmic system we're used to. You now press the west face button for a light melee attack, or hold it for a heavy attack. The north facing counter button has been replaced with a ranged attack, You've got special moves that you build a meter for and activate by pressing R1 and a face button, like this is an anime arena fighter. It has an entirely different, and worse, flow to it. The attack animation, sound effects, and visual effects lack oomph or impact. There's no satisfying crack. The enemies don't recoil in pain, and you're not sure if you just hit a guy or lightly brushed them with a feather. This feels even worse if you're not keeping up with the seemingly tacked-on loot, crafting, and upgrade systems, as every enemy becomes a damage sponge that takes forever to defeat otherwise. The stealth has likewise been watered down, with fewer options basically forcing you to do silent takedowns only. There's no planning involved. You don't get to mess with the enemies and watch them squirm in the same way as the Arkham titles allowed for. Failure is accepted, as it just becomes a regular combat encounter, whereas Arkham's stealth pitted you against foes that would gun you down in seconds if you got spotted. The tension is completely gone. It just feels basic, like the developers put these sections in as an obligation. You can't just go from story event to story event either. You have to go out into Gotham, prevent repetitive, seemingly automatically generated crimes to earn points towards your investigation before you can then unlock the next story mission. You're actively having your time wasted by filler content that's not very engaging. That story isn't as compelling as it could have been. Opening with Batman's death and following his protégés as they step up could have been more interesting if these were the Arkhamverse characters that we already knew and had an attachment to. Red Hood especially, given his role in Arkham Knight, indirectly causing Batman to fake his death. Yes, the world considers Batman to be dead at the end of the last game and the start of this one, yet the two are somehow entirely unconnected. I think we'll get a Matt McMuscle's What Happened style video revealing that this was originally planned to be Arkhamverse, as it's too much of a coincidence otherwise. Sure, the Arkhamverse Barbara Gordon was paralysed by the Joker, borrowing from The Killing Joke. She was in a wheelchair and acting as Oracle in Arkham's Asylum and Knight. It seems implausible that she could return as Batgirl. I recognise that the New 52 saying she magically got better was frankly insensitive and insulting towards an entire community of disabled people who are never going to be able to walk again and lack representation. There is a viable workaround that the Arkhamverse could have used, which is simply that other Batgirls are available. This could have been an opportunity to introduce Stephanie Brown or Cassandra Cain, especially if this Barbara is new to us anyway. In this case, it was quickly apparent that, mechanically, this game didn't feel good to play, while conceptually, I just couldn't get over the missed opportunity of expanding on the Arkhamverse. I had to question whether I could accept it on its own terms for what it was, rather than constantly lamenting what it could have been. I did an entire video on my frustrations with the Sonic Frontiers DLC, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much here. Essentially, they locked story content behind a poorly balanced challenge mode, and failed to communicate critical mechanical changes that are exclusive to the DLC, such as stricter parry timing. We had long sections of precision platforming with loose controls and no checkpoints. Combined with timed combat challenges that require you to use specific strategies that the game never teaches you, with most people looking up the answers online. Now, I will admit that I wrote that video while I was still emotive and frustrated. I also had a bias of feeling like I needed to get a video out as close to the DLC's release date as possible, and that may have caused my gameplay style to be a little more rushed, brute force, and impatient. Thankfully, I took those lessons forward into Sonic Superstars. I gave myself longer and the video came out at a higher quality around a month after that game did. A lot of the comments on my Frontiers rant said skill issue. I was aware I had written from a place of anger, frustration, and impatience, so I did wonder, do they have a point? Am I wrong? So I went back to the DLC, gave it a second chance, made more progress than before, but still felt annoyed throughout. Realising that Xenoblade might not be for me was a slow burn. The first signs of trouble were that the time between my play sessions went from days to weeks to months apart, and I knocked the battle difficulty level down as I grew disengaged and frustrated with the battle system. Part of the gaps between sessions is due to me and my lifestyle. My wife likes to watch me play certain games, especially story and character-focused titles. She gets mad if I play without her because she doesn't want to miss anything, and that's why it took me a long time to get through, for example, Uncharted, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Portal. RPGs are usually a good fit for that because I can do a solo session just level grinding or doing side quests, saving mainline story quests for when she's with me. Unfortunately, she also likes to magpie towards the next shiny thing, and we have a ton of half-finished series in our Netflix and Crunchyroll libraries as a result. Xenoblade suffered a similar fate, especially over the summer when, due to childcare, or more accurately a lack thereof, I was working in the day and my wife was working evenings. It was hard to find opportunities to sit down and play it together. That was also a factor in my shift from doing every side quest, because that's all I could do when I was playing solo, to skipping them when my wife was around so we could make the most of those few and far between opportunities. The other factor was that the side quests all followed similar templates. Find 5 of this item, kill this particular monster, deliver this item to this person. I got bored of them, and the meagre experience and monetary rewards didn't leave me particularly overpowered or rich, limiting the advantages for progressing the main story. The plot started out strong, but without spoilers, started to lose momentum and meander. I found myself frequently wondering, where is this going? How is this relevant? When will this game get to the point already? As I get older and have less free time, I find myself favouring games that are all killer, no filler, while Xenoblade wanted me to take a much more leisurely journey through its world. Finally, that battle system just isn't for me. I love turn-based RPGs such as Dragon Quest, I can vibe with real-time action RPGs like Kingdom Hearts, but I'm not a fan of the ones that find themselves somewhere in between. Xenoblade attacks automatically, allowing you to focus on your positioning and the timing of your special abilities. It reminded me of Final Fantasy XII, which was a bad sign as I dropped FF12, mainly because of its battle system. I also found that Xenoblade adds in a lot of mechanics as the game progresses, and the UI presents too much information, which all fights for your attention. This is an unreadable mess that makes it harder to make informed decisions or realise that your ally needs healing right now. It also interrupts fights with Shulk's visions of the future which, while handy for setting up counter tactics, breaks the flow of battle. The game introduced elemental attacks and enemies, but I didn't understand how to inflict or defend against various elements or status effects. All of these issues compounded, sitting on top of one another, and I spent most of my time in Xenoblade's fights feeling frustrated and confused to the point that I disengaged, knocked the difficulty down, and went on autopilot. In most cases, we tend to stick with games for far longer than we probably should. At least, I certainly do. We might feel like it's been a waste of time or money if we don't finish a game. It was 40 quid, I have to get my money's worth. I'm 20 hours in, I can't stop now. In the case of Gotham Knights specifically, I felt guilty because I'd received it as a gift. It felt like I was somehow letting the person who gave it to me down, as if I was somehow obligated to enjoy it, else I would seem ungrateful and hurt their feelings. I'm sure you've heard a bunch of YouTubers refer to these emotions as the sunken cost fallacy. For me, I can certainly recognise a sense of denial and bargaining. I'll tell myself, I'm sure things improve after this level. I'm not in the right mood for this game right now. Or, I'm just playing badly. And sometimes, sure, that can be true. You get past that boss, you go and take a walk or do something else for a bit, your skill level improves, or something else changes and you start to enjoy the game. In my experience though, that tends to be the exception rather than the rule. We don't want to believe that a game we were excited for, that our friends recommended, that we spent our money on, that we're already 6 hours into, is a bad fit for us or isn't what we're looking for. We don't want to upset ourselves or others. How can we have been so stupid? Don't we know ourselves and our own tastes? I find myself rejecting and fighting my own sense of disappointment. I continue craving the promise, the potential of what could have been. I stick around trying to find those absent qualities, seeking out the game I thought I was getting, the title I was initially excited for. It causes me to keep playing a game long after it stopped being fun, and that's the real loss. That's the real waste of time. I found there's usually a defined stopping point, a straw that breaks the camel's back and causes me to finally quit the game. It's usually an extreme example of one particular issue, or the compounding of several problems joining forces for a spectacular shitshow. Before I detail those, I want to stress that saying a game isn't for me isn't the same as saying a game is bad. I'm sure they could be someone else's favourite. There was a point in Gotham Knights where I reached the end of a story mission. I got locked in a room with a mini-boss and some henchmen, one of which can heal other enemies and became my priority target. When I cleared that, I had to face a different mini-boss in the same room, again assisted by regular enemies. When I then beat that, I was placed in a smaller arena with both of the mini-bosses, more regular thugs, and time bombs that I had to repeatedly defuse. In that cramped space, it became impossible to multitask, so I died time and time again, growing increasingly frustrated each time. I had leveled up a couple of times throughout the mission and found some crafting materials, so I made some better armor and weapons with higher numbers to improve my chances, only to get a message saying that I couldn't access those new items until I returned to the Belfry, this game's hub. So I gritted my teeth, I abandoned the mission, I equipped my new gear, I replayed the entire level to get back to that final room, and I found I was only doing about 10 more damage per hit, certainly not a meaningful increase. This encounter reminded me that this game was designed as an online co-op experience. This would be much more manageable with one player keeping the mini-bosses in check, while another player fights the regular bad guys and focuses on defusing the bombs. Thing is, none of my friends had the game, and I had no desire to hop in with randoms. So any mandatory encounters that aren't balanced for single player will continue to be an issue. Knowing that, and knowing how miserable this particular encounter was, I walked away. I had no intention of subjecting myself to what I assumed would be more similarly designed scenarios further into the game. If you've seen my existing video on Sonic Frontiers' third DLC, you won't be surprised to hear that falling from the second tower for the 10th time with no checkpoints, and homing attack targets having not respawned, making the climb back up even harder, was asking for more patience than I had. I was also bitterly aware that this was Tower 2 of 5. Even if I cleared this one, I figured that the remaining towers would probably get progressively harder and presumably even more infuriating, drawing weird parallels to my Gotham experience. Yes, I could knock the difficulty level down to easy, which adds extra homing attack targets and allows you to skip parts of the climb, but I feel the normal difficulty, or whatever a game defaults to, best communicates the developer's intended experience. Players shouldn't have to manage or band-aid a game's balancing themselves. As I stated in my original video on the Frontiers DLC, I play games to have fun, and this wasn't fun. It really is that simple and straightforward for me. I came back to this DLC wondering if the circumstances I'd made that previous video under had been the reason I didn't get along with the add-on. Whether the comments section had been right, and whether I was missing out on a great Sonic experience. I can now confidently say that this DLC is poorly designed, and anyone who wrote skill issue in the comments of that past video were being reductive and smug. Screw this absolute travesty of a DLC. I had been fatigued with Xenoblade Chronicles for a while, but it was this boss fight against an assassin and a Telethia that turned me off. There were times where I only seemed to be doing 1 HP of damage, my active target kept getting forcibly changed, and thanks to the absolute deluge of on-screen information in this cluttered UI, I had no idea why. Now, with the advantage of hindsight, I should have had Melia in my active party for this fight. The boss fight of the prior chapter is against a Telethia, and does tutorialise how to defeat one, with Melia being a key component of that fight, but the huge gap between my play sessions meant that real-world months had passed since that encounter. Melia can't be in the party before the fight, as she's been separated from you for story reasons I won't spoil here. However, you are given a brief opportunity immediately before the fight to change your party and pop her in. Now, I am an idiot who dismissed this pop-up and went into the conflict with my static trio of favourites. I can't place the blame on this single boss battle. The writing had been on the wall for a while, and this session merely compounded a series of existing frustrations due to my own lack of understanding or engagement with Xenoblade's systems. My unwillingness to pass whatever the hell all of this is. This was the definition of the straw that broke the camel's back. Until I went to record footage for this video and somehow beat the boss! I genuinely can't tell you what I did differently to achieve this outcome, and that hilariously describes why Xenoblade Chronicles might not be the right game for me. I had the same party, I was using the same tactics, I was doing my best to reenact my original experience, because I don't compulsively record every game I play, just in case I might need the footage for a video later. Ironically, the same thing then happened to me when I was recording Gotham Knights footage. The eagle-eyed among you might have noticed I've used recordings from later points in that game because I kept playing it. And then, as I'm recording this, Sega have put out a patch for Frontiers which reportedly addresses some of the issues with that DLC, because of course they have! That begs the question, are my complaints still valid? Do I give it a third chance? Do we hold on to games we're not getting along with in the hopes future updates will improve things? Case in point, look at Cyberpunk and No Man's Sky having their redemption arcs. This is the plot twist I alluded to earlier, this back-to-back invalidation of my breaking points for all three games. I even have to question whether recording the footage is what made the difference for Gotham and Xenoblade. Does knowing we're recording gameplay for a public audience impact our performance? These all presented the same question. Now what? This is where I've had to unexpectedly do some introspection and apply some self-discipline. I felt tempted to continue with all three of these games. Those thoughts from the Resistance stage started to creep back in. Maybe these games aren't so bad. Gotham in particular seems like something I could autopilot my way through after a taxing day at work when I just need to shut my brain off. A junk food game. I've had to remind myself that I had already decided to drop these games for numerous reasons that are still present and valid. I would be playing them out of a weird sense of obligation. There's also the opportunity costs to consider. With a massive backlog, in a year where we've had some fantastic games releasing, any more time spent not really clicking or vibing with Xenoblade, Gotham, and the Frontiers DLC is time I could have been playing something that truly speaks to and engages me. One advantage of owning most of these games physically is that I have the option of trading them in. That action can help us gain a sense of closure, because it takes away the option and temptation of giving these titles their 500th last chance. It also helps us recoup some of the money we spent on them, alleviating some of the guilt we might feel. We also have the option of store credit towards a game that we'll hopefully enjoy more, something that will help us forget and move on from our disappointing experiences. I know I won't trade them in. Come on, have you seen my shelves? I have a problem. But for those of you who aren't weirdly attached to plastic tat, selling the game on can be a powerful final step. Who knows, the game's new owner might be someone whose tastes are different to yours, who does truly love and enjoy these games. Something good can still come from it. To summarise, trust your gut instincts. If you're not enjoying a game, then drop it. It doesn't matter what your friends, the internet, or anyone else tells you. Not every game, including supposed masterpieces, will be for you, and that's okay. Let me know which games you've recently quit in the comments below, while I thank my patrons Crow, Tiny Jericho, Mr. Terry Chaos, DuckyGo, and Francis T218 for their continued support. For early access to scripts and other goodies, join my Patreon from as little as £1 per month. You can also support the channel for free by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing this video around. I'll see you again soon when my Batman Arkham retrospective continues as we review Batman Arkham City.